Yes, we are good to start. We can see the screen. Hello, Vanessa. We lost your screen sharing.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry. I didn't think anyone was I just wanted to check that before. All right. Let's get going.
Yeah, we can see
Um
the screen. Yeah.
okay, perfect. Thank you. I just want to say thank you guys for joining. And I always personally like to start off thanking our sponsors, right? Thanking the organizing committee, the moderators, for putting on such a great event. And this has actually been one of the better uh, advertised, right, events, I guess. And it's the first time I'm speaking here as well. So thank you absolutely to Avanade, Microsoft, right, every one of the partners, and of course, like I said, the moderators. My focus is very specifically around protecting our data, right, and answering this question about resiliency and how resilient can our data be if you only have one point in time. And it's amazing that the answers that I've gotten out of that question. So, oh, I forgot to actually also share this. I want to make sure that everyone's seen this. I'm sure you have. But please continue to also support right, Scope for Change as well. Okay. So my name is Vanessa Tovis. I am a Microsoft 365 solution architect, and I've been working with Microsoft technologies since the very first version of SharePoint on premises and their first versions of their BI suite. So SSRS, SSAS, all that stuff. And I've focused my career on Microsoft technologies, and I've followed that my career right all the way through and into 365. So I have seen the progression, I've seen the improvements, the changes, both from as a professional, but also with what other companies, how companies are using these platforms. I This is the first career shift for me was going to a data protection company. And I did that about 2 years ago, mainly because of what I saw. Right. I worked with large and enterprise customers, and I saw a certain pattern, a certain trend, and it was somewhat alarming in terms of what was happening. And that's the core reason why I switched to being so I'm a subject matter expert for our product, our 365 product and I get to work with our engineering, our product team, our sales team, our marketing team, our sales engineers, everyone, because of how much more utilized, right, and widespread adopted 365 has become, especially over the last couple of years. Um, at the heart of that, what I also saw was that companies they were taking their security of their data for granted and even the features that they had license to, they weren't even using those. So whether a company had an E3 or even an E5, they weren't using some of the back end features that were available. They definitely were not prioritizing backup, and that was a big shift. It was never a question when I would go set up a server farm, for a company of 10,000 employees or 50,000 employees, that once we created that farm, we had a backup plan. We actually also had, a development server but the backup itself, that was always the thing that we tested as part of our go live. Can we recover the VMs? Can we recover the database server, right? Can we do any and all of that? And that went out the window with 365. It was just such a shift, and I was kind of blown away. Um, we'll get into more of the specifics as we go through here, but ultimately the question that we are going to answer today is, right, how resilient can we be? How resilient can you be if your data only has one point in time? Right? What is Microsoft talking about today? What are the native recovery features, and are they enough? And what should we be looking for? Right. So that's it. That's important. So I did what's called software selection, even when I was right, working in the on-premises side, and even early into the 365 life. And that's where, as a consultant, you would go and like compare all these different vendors. Your customer would have requirements for what they were looking for from a backup solution. And we're going to focus on some of those things that I was looking for, especially what I looked for when I was going to work for a data protection company. So let's take a stab at this. So there's a great security summit Microsoft had, and I think they have it every year. And it was early in this year, but I really enjoyed it. In fact, I watched it a second time. I more listened to it a second time. What I heard in there was very compelling as to the investment, where Microsoft was going, where they were putting their resources, their money, and everything, what they were doing to protect the data. But what I did hear very specifically was things that we're doing from a preventative measure and an active measure, right? The data is, what's happening now? What are they doing to monitor right now? What's being monitored? What features can I use? What software or what services can I use to help prevent certain things? And that was really the primary focus. There definitely was not a post event focus, other than in the typical retention, the features that we kind of have come to utilize, legal hold, right? There's certain things, and that was all focused around data that still was in this platform, not necessarily what happens if everything passed a certain line, right? And that becomes important to understand because the data in 365 lives in Azure, right? It's stored in Azure. And underneath the Azure, the entire world that 365 lives in, there's a shared responsibility model. That model has never changed. I own my data. I am responsible for my data. Microsoft is responsible for the infrastructure, right? They're responsible for other features and everything that you're licensing, not just service. So it's definitely something that when we look at, we have to realize that there's no true platform, no app, no service in here that says I'm going to be able to back up and restore your data for you, and especially in the manner, right, in the use cases that we need. Now, last year was the first time. It was actually in September of last year that this post came out, and in the docs.microsoft.com. And it was the first time that I saw Microsoft Message, ransomware, and 365 together like this. And very specifically, what do you do? Step number one. So this is a live article, a live post. But what are the steps? There's several steps, right? But the first two that are the ones I focus on, right? Verify your backups. Make sure your backups are in place. Now, they framed this article, when this article first came out, they framed it around Exchange Online. And at that time, they weren't positioning the same message for SharePoint or OneDrive or any of that. And we'll talk about why that was somewhat, and I would call it a mistake or missed opportunity. Right now, the second thing the second step, right, that Microsoft wrote about in this ransomware recovery is to disable OneDrive Sync. And we'll talk more about OneDrive Sync, right? We'll focus on that. But for those of you that don't know, OneDrive is incorporates a number of things. One, it's a service, right, where you have user files, very specifically. There's also a component of it that's called a sync tool. Now that sync tool moved underneath the Windows development framework, and that is an application that I install on my computer where I can pull those data, right? I can utilize the files that are in my OneDrive, but it looks like a file explorer. And there was a large ramp up of OneDrive and of OneDrive Sync, right? Because these and once again, as when you work with customers, you see the things that they don't like and don't want to do. One of the reasons why OneDrive Sync became so popular was people never liked going to the GUI to go to OneDrive. Like that thing was around for a long time, but they always preferred to interact with it this way. So why is it then number two? That's because there's no credential challenge, right, from the laptop or the desktop. And other than that first right configuration, potentially when you change your password, and this is important to understand because the acts of where malware enters, right, what affects something, it starts at the laptop or desktop. So someone is in their Outlook, someone is on a browser, someone is somewhere else, and there's a huge investment that organizations are making, and they're trying to make with please don't click that link. Check who the real sender is. Just don't click it. Right? Delete the email, but that still doesn't happen. People still are the entry point of how viruses spread. So when there's no credential challenge and malware can iterate through the directory structure of a device that I, as a user, have access to, one of the things that they can get to is my OneDrive, right? My OneDrive through this OneDrive sync. Now, OneDrive Sync, I think I talk about it in a little bit more, but this is really around what Microsoft has been framing the conversation around, right? Protecting your 365 data. What are some of the mitigating things that you can do? Absolutely, they're beginning to provide more resources, and I wouldn't say beginning. They've done plans like this for a long time, but they are messaging it better, right? Please protect your data. Right? Secure your backup. Here's a checklist. Here's who should be involved. Have a plan. And this was something that companies were not doing. So where then, right, where are the challenges? Like we're going to get down into the nitty gritty, right? Where are the challenges of how data resiliency is challenged in 365? The first one absolutely is perception. The perception that companies have, you as an individual have, admins have, users have, that what I have is enough, that it's sufficient. Use retention, right? Use the version history. We have legal hold, right? Any one of these, but what most people don't realize is that the recycle bin was designed for SharePoint, even in the on-premises world, when there wasn't the same threat, or the threats were different. Right? It's not intended as a mechanism to be able to recover your data on an enterprise scale. Right? The engineers, the product teams that actually built these things, they built them for very specific purposes. So retention has a very specific purpose. All of these individual things that companies and individuals have this is where they kind of threw their hands up and they're like, the platform is more reliable. It's good. We don't need it. We haven't had any problems in the last 2 years. But that's never been the issue, right? That I don't have a problem now. The other thing is that the apps underneath it and the interdependencies of data are not the same. So every one of these, I can go to I can access this data in silo. But the difference is that when I provision a team, when I look at a team and recovering a team, I have to consider the metadata for the team, the channels, the posts, absolutely, right? But the exchange mailbox, right? The calendar, right? The membership, any and all of those, because recovery isn't just at the point of the SharePoint for a team, right? The recovery now becomes this horizontal world because of these interdependencies. And this is why I remember that first article when I said that they framed that article just around Exchange. Well, if we look at the data sources of Teams, we have to realize that what is actually saved in Teams is a very small amount of information and data, but it pulls its sources, its information, and as a collective, right? It's pulling in OneDrive or SharePoint. It's pulling, right? It's utilizing the Exchange aspects of it. Right. At one point, it was using Stream, which, by the way, I still like Stream. Stream has a purpose, and if Stream, maybe would have been architected to allow for guests and whatnot, it'd still maybe be around. The point that I'm making in this is that we can't just uh, talk about and say we have to only protect Exchange, right? Only check your backups for Exchange. And let's see. Sorry, and my headset just said disconnected from computer, so I just want to make sure. I'm just doing a quick check. Can you guys hear me still?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, perfect. So, right, when we think about that first step of ransomware recovery that Microsoft's talking about, check your backups, go back up your data, right? This is what we have to think about, is not in silo, that things are now so interconnected. Now we're going to we start challenging each one of these apps, right? This is the part of the resilience, right? The simple question that you can ask of your data of anything: can I restore my primary user's mailbox and online archive to a prior point in time? And the answer to that is no. Everything we talked about here, it's all published. Right? There's a number of these things where no, you can't. No, you can't. If you've enabled this flag, no, you can't. Right? There's certain things that you can't do. So we have to consider what is it that we need to protect, especially when we're talking about Exchange as an example. Exchange has a number of components, but they're really the core components that are important are the active mailbox, the in-place or online archive, and the recoverable items. So when we even talk with our compliance, our risk management, our security, and they're saying, hey, we need a, or even our legal, when I need to go get this mailbox, it's not just asking me to go get and extract a PST or only do a legal case discovery for what's now, right, for today or some of the things that were held, but it's so we have to kind of look at this collective view. So when we're recovering, when we need the use case to recover data, we have to look at the entire mailbox. And there's not one place in 365 that as an admin that I can go and navigate and get all of those, right? Absolutely, you can go get bits and pieces here or there. And it becomes even more when the smaller and the younger, or I should say smaller, right, small to mid-sized companies, when they're using this model of converting their shared mailbox or their user mailbox to a shared mailbox, right? Part of data loss occurs absolutely at the hands of a user, maybe of an admin, of a third party external, right? But the other part can come from the system itself without really communicating the impact. So if I have an online archive and I use the convert to shared mailbox, if I don't maintain at a minimum, a license that has Exchange on it, if I don't maintain that, I will lose when I convert that. I will not have my online archive. So these administrative things, the features that we do have, yes, it's easy. It's an easy button because in the offboarding process, the reason why people are doing this, one, an admin they see it, they're like, oh, cool. That makes sense. I'm going to convert my user mailbox to an online archive, to a shared mailbox. But what they don't do is they don't read the fine print, right? This is where the admins themselves, and I was an admin. I understand what it means. I get the day to day, but the reality is 365 administration, even Azure, it's so wide and it's very deep in its administration, right? And things are changing. And because of the where we are today, the admins now, they're doing so much more. They're a Jira admin, an Okta admin, a Salesforce admin, they're a 365 admin. They're still by chance also setting up desktops and laptops, right? Managing the network. They're the depth of knowledge isn't always there. So I call this what happened to this person, like what's on the other side of that button effect, right? This admin had a ticket, go delete the chat for this one user. He created a policy and he pressed that button and applied that policy to the wrong group. He applied it to a group that had all of the users. And in this case, that chat, it's accessible, right? deleted chat is accessible through e-discovery, but I can't put it back. I can't put it back in all the teams. So even as an admin, we have the ability to affect the data, right? Admins can affect data that they don't own or that they didn't curate on a daily basis. So now we start going out and looking at the user base. The users act the same way, regardless of if the platform is on premises or if it's in the cloud. So when I looked at all the ticketing systems, right, for all the customers would work with in the past, I picked some of the core things, some of the things that are in there, and they're probably in your ticketing system today, right? And you only have to ask your help desk, hey, what are the most common issues that users are having? Deleting a user from a site. The ticket sounds something like this. I used to have access to this yesterday, but I don't today. Help, right? In the world of a user, just because you can doesn't mean you should, doesn't always apply to them. They see a button. Oftentimes they're bored and they're like, oh, this is a button. What does this do? All right, deleting a column from a list or library. It's interesting because especially with the adoption of Teams, when you would create a list or you'd have a column in a library, whether it's your contracts library, it's so much easier for a user to create a column and begin tagging. Right, they're tagging that data, and they're tagging it now. Especially solution architects are making, solutions that like for legal contracts that utilize Power Automate and that listen to the changes in these. And a user can go in to do something like, let me go add another value to this column because I like it. It works. They wanted to add canceled, right, to the status of open and close. But right next to the OK button is the delete button. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen individuals delete an entire column, not the files, not the list, but they deleted a column. So when we think about what's lost, the data loss, those 3 different buckets or 4 different buckets, the users are still doing the things. They're still using that move function. And luckily, Microsoft has put a good boundary around the move function in a library. But it's not a migration tool. So a user doesn't care that when they click a folder, they don't care that there's 10,000 files, 400 folders, it's nested 5 deep, and there's 24 gigs of data in there. They click it, they move it, and they open up a ticket that says, hey, I was moving this folder from here to our other library or another site, and half of it's over there, and the other half I think is still here, help. Right? In the move function, there's no undo. I can't undo half the stuff that moved and other half that's there. So resiliency is all about being able to, as an organization, to support the user actions, right? Support someone changing the security model of a sensitive site, right? And things like that. Now we talk about the other features, right? There's one in particular, the backup and restore function that's in the SharePoint libraries or it's in OneDrive themselves. You can access this today. But the problem I have with that from an enterprise, from a company-wide perspective, is there's 2 big dependencies, right? They're dependent on files remaining in a recycle bin, and they're dependent upon version history. So it's not as if I'm looking at this and I have restored my OneDrive and I'm going to go pull from yesterday's backup. I'm going to go pull from things that are not able to change. No, I'm dependent on version. Now, the problem with version history and a dependency is this. This deck that I have officially has about 1,700 versions. The default in every library is 500. So you do the math. How far back can I go to get the prior versions? Right? And especially, this is just me, in a collaborative world, when I've got my budget file that's an Excel file and I'm sharing that across different organizations, right, within my company, within 5 minutes, of 10 people being in that file, I can iterate through 200 versions, right? That's just the nature of the platform. You have to have something like that, this collaborative tool to be able to have, oh, versions. Someone clicked a button, someone added a new image, it's going to iterate this version. So we can't look at version, right? The versions that are there are collaboration versions. And if I had to go recover, I did a survey of a number of other customers I've worked with, and I said, if you had to go recover and you saw this screen, which was a screenshot of versions, which one would you go get? They all picked the last version of the day, the most recent version, right, to recover from. The other thing I think about is in this, what's available, right? What's native is in the function of the backup functionality, backup my desktop. Right? That's part of the OneDrive, right? Part of the OneDrive backup. Now, initially, it is a backup. When I click that button and I say backup my 3 folders on my desktop, right? My pictures, my documents, my desktop. That initial pass, it's a backup. I have the files locally on my laptop and it pushes all up to OneDrive. Right? So there's now 2. So yeah, I got a warm and fuzzy. But what happens, and it happens in the background, is that all the files that are local, they get replaced with these links, right? These links that just take me to and pull my OneDrive back. Like pull the file from my OneDrive. So that happens silently and in the background. Now, there's a feature that's called files on demand. I think that's what it's called. Yeah. And that's part of what it does. It says, oh, you've got 5 terabytes of data or 4, or not like you've got 3 terabytes of data in your OneDrive. You don't need to have that on your local machine. So I'm going to turn that on. And that gives you these pointers. Now, everything has a pro, but it also has a con. And so utilizing this feature to back up back up your laptops, your desktops, yes, it's great. But don't be mistaken, you still, after a period of time, only have 1 point of that file now, 1 version. Right? Now, let's talk about the enterprise recovery. So when we go and we have to recover, if I only had to recover 1 or 2 or 3, maybe I might rely upon that OneDrive backup, right? I might say, let me walk you through that. Go to your OneDrive, click over here, click this, do the slider to last Thursday. But if I'm talking about a response to a ransomware attack and I need to recover my data, and I have 1,000 people in my organization that are affected, and we determined, right? One of the first things that's determined during a ransomware attack is the when. When did this enter our system? When did our data start getting affected? Who was affected? So out of that 1,000 employees that I have, and that's a very small number of employees for the average customer for Microsoft, right? 500 of them were affected. Am I going to call up 500 individuals and say, go back to this point and right, go and do this and click this button and I'll call you back. And then I go to the next person. Am I going to do that? Right? Or anyone that doesn't barely gets on, they use the OneDrive right on the endpoint, the OneDrive sync. No, what I need to do is I need to be able to say for the 500, the 1,000, the 2,400 individuals, I need to be able to recover to the same point in time, get that done as quickly as possible, and then 2, verify that what was recovered was done and that I didn't reintroduce the same, corrupted data potentially back into the system. Right? So this is what we have, right? The platform itself. I love Microsoft 365. I love where it is. I love where it's going. I think it is the absolute best platform there is. From a collaboration, from a security, all of that. I'm the a number 1 fan, but that doesn't mean that there aren't gaps. And as you begin to use it more and more, the investments that you're making aren't just about files, right? They're not just about an email, but it's about the solutions that you create, that as a collective, I'm using 5 apps in here to solve, so many problems in the organization, information problems. So now let's talk about SaaS data protection architecture, right? So I'll talk about this because, and I'll start with this. I work for Druva. I chose to go to work for Druva. That was the one that I chose. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other vendors, right? I know so many of them. I've worked with them before. So whatever it is, whatever the platform is that fills the need, that fills the requirements that you're looking at, right? Whether it's AvePoint, Veeam, right? Dell's Apex, Metallic, any one of those. At this point, I'm talking about protecting your data. I'm going to frame this conversation just by chance around what I know and the things that I'm aware, right, that I have access to. So when we talk about the data protection, I'll skip through this screen right here. It is, you have to ask yourself one question: where do you go to recover from a ransomware attack, right? Or not even ransomware. Where do you go to, fix this user problem, fix this problem that you caused? Someone did, some user ticket where they, deleted, the mass updated a column, and you need to recover the metadata for that. And where do you start? Where do you go now? At the heart of this platform, and a platform that protects data in the cloud, comes with where that data goes, right? Utilizing Azure, utilizing the identity service to validate that account that I'm using to connect, utilizing the API layer, and not passing a username or password, but using the access token, refresh token, right? And how is your data, how is this done? And then for us, right, for Druva, when we take that data that we back up, that data gets split into 2 different buckets. One is your data, the actual files, and the other one is metadata. So when we talk about the what happens with data protection, especially for SaaS-based, this is it. There's an account that's used. There's generally, right, there's the API layer, and then your data is being saved in some location. For some vendors, that's Azure. For us, it's AWS, right? Some bring their own storage. Now, what happens in this is, for, right, an app gets deployed in your Azure AD, your enterprise applications. And that app, what happens in that app is important for you to know, right? I authenticate, I provision an app, right? The app is deployed, and then there are permissions that are consented to that app. And then there's a connection back, right? So there should never be a persistent connection back to a vendor, right? The connection is that, hey, I'm able to do this, right? I'm able to function. I have the right permissions. And then in this too, how can I do that? How is it that I just want to back up OneDrive, or I just want to back up SharePoint? What you need to look for is a model that supports multiple types of configuration based upon your needs. If you want to back everything up, or if you want to back up, right, Exchange or not backup groups, or if you just want to start, right? The model that we have is started with one of the largest consulting companies in the world saying, we want to start just with Exchange. We don't want you to have access to the rest of our stuff. So this is how it came about, is that you have to look for a platform that has the ability to provide you multiple layers, because this account in your Azure AD has access to all of your data. So you want to make sure that it's secured, that it only has access to the data that you're telling it to have access to. Okay? Now, generally, what's going to happen? What you should be looking for is Microsoft, regardless of what vendor you're looking for, requires that first part, right? This part right back here, this part right here requires a global admin. And it requires it because, one, you're provisioning an app in Azure. Two, you're consenting permissions to the API for that app. But once for Druva, once that configuration is done, you can release that global admin. We do not want, it is something we recommend, right? During our proof of concepts, it's like, okay, did you go remove the global admin from this? Because we want you to see that you can function, that your backup should be able to function without elevated permissions. That becomes very important. We have to think about the backups, the vendors that we use to protect our data also considers our security as an organization. Right? Now, let's talk about flexibility. So as when I was doing these software selections, the things I looked for were absolutely pricing, 2, granularity, and flexibility. So when we look at the flexibility of any platform, how are you securing my data? How can you support the way we work as an organization? Well, we've got 4 layers of security. How you secure data. Yes, like our platform is protects more than just 365. So we have a workload for 365. So I can permission at that level. And then I, of course, have roles within here that we can permission on that level. And then you have an app layer that we have, which means if your organization actually supports and actually follows, segregation of duties, why in the world would you go to a platform that where an exchange admin or an admin only had rights to exchange-based data, to the production data, but in the world of your backup, they have access to everything. And so we've got app-based permissions. You need a model from a security perspective that supports how you work, right? How you're securing your data today. The provisioning that I talked about, that's where the app that's in your Azure AD, right? As organizations, as admins modify, right? Add users, remove users. That's where that app will turn on and turn off, right? It says, oh, something has happened on the Azure side. A new user has been added. It has these properties. We need to ship that user over, and it lands in a particular profile. That's how it was by chance configured. Or a user was deleted, right? Not deleted. A user was disabled, right? They're leaving. They're terminated. So we go and right, we need to hear that. We're listening for that, and then we go and say, oh, this user's disabled. Don't try and back him up anymore. At that point. The other thing is this profile. This is the 4th layer of security. So when you are looking for a vendor, you need to see how they are enabling you to support your security. So the 4th layer of security that we have in here is around the user base. You can have profiles. Think about profiles somewhat like 365, right? Or 365 groups, where you have a bunch of people in a group, and then that group has the ability to have access to something. In this case, I can have profiles that are of users that could be based upon organizational structure. So, right, this department, this team, this org. I can create a profile that supports location, Australia, the US West, the UK, right? All of those. So you can have a number of these profiles to support how you want to organize the sensitivity of data. So maybe my board of directors are all in there, my senior leadership is all in there. And every one of those profiles, not only can I secure that to what admins have access to that data, but they also have their own flexibility of saying, for the senior leadership profile, I want to back them up twice a day. Whereas my call center, I only want to back up the Exchange. I don't want to back up their OneDrive. Backup Exchange, I'm going to back them up once a day. And so that's not just the security granularity, but also the flexibility of that. Now, when we look at this, is what I talked about. So I'm going to give you a visual, and then I know I'm going to go spend some time looking at a platform and talking about the functions within. But this really sets it should give you this mindset of like, okay, segregation of duties. Yep, we do that. Yep, we've got that. We've got a person that has access to everything. We have an admin nowadays that just has access to 365. Yep, that's how we do it today. Now we have a role of a 365 admin, and I have 2 different people. I've got the person below has only access to Exchange and OneDrive, where the person above has access to all the apps. But very interestingly, the person at the bottom, right, the admin at the bottom, has access to the executive leadership team, whereas the one above does not. Right, so when we look for a platform that provides us data protection for our data, we have to also consider how is it securing that data within? Does it support how we function, how we work? The other part to that is data residency requirements. For companies that are in the U.S., they might create multiple U.S. West 1, U.S. West, U.S. West 1, U.S. East 1, right, U.S. Central 1. They can use up to like 16 different storage locations. And you can use these storage locations across the globe, and you can do that dependent upon a user's property. For some that use the multi-geo feature, there's what's called a PDL, preferred data location, that gets assigned. So as we bring users in, right, as a user comes in, it says, hey, there's a new user, and her preferred data location is Australia. And that means there's a rule that was put in place that said anyone with Australia needs to go to the AUS West 1 storage location. So not only does our data, do we need to have this great platform, we need to make sure that our data is in compliance. Now, there are some organizations that all of their entire tenant is in Europe, or the entire tenant is in the US, and they're not in compliance, right? They're not using the multi-geo feature of 365, but they do have a property called country, or they do have a property called office, whatever it is. And so for those organizations that are not in compliance with where their 365 data is being stored, your backups can still be in compliance. Right? You can say, oh, yes, I'm going to create the rule. Instead of it being the preferred data location, I want to use this Azure property and say, if country is this, then store that in this storage location. So when we do this, it's important to really look at architectures that will support how you currently secure your data, how you currently secure things today, how do you work, what are your compliance needs, and now we'll just take a look at and talk about some of the detailed functionality, right? The things that we look at. I'm going to block this for maybe 10 minutes, then we'll open this up for questions. So when we are utilizing any platform, right? Flexibility, granularity. So the profiles are the things that can actually group my users together, because I want different retentions. I want different frequencies of backup. I want to apply different rules to the engineering team or to the executive leadership team. I want to know how this is working, right? And I want to define that for this particular profile, I want to say I want to back up absolutely devices, but I want to back up these SaaS apps. I want to back up, we're coming out of Google and moving into 365. So I want to back up the Gmail, the Google Drive, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Exchange Online. Right? That's kind of like the concept of how you deal with users as a whole. So you find that organizationally, can you find something that supports not just how you want to back up, like I want to back up a user, but what you need to do with collections of users, right? So there's quite a number of those things, and absolutely. If we go back to just focusing on the actual applications themselves, right? Druva, we protect, right? Exchange Online, OneDrive, Groups, Public Folders, SharePoint, Teams, and planners on deck. But even in OneDrive, right, being able to protect your shared mailboxes, your resource mailboxes, and absolutely, being able to look at, right, this is now starts we think about use cases. The use case, like the first big use case is, do we back up our data and can we recover? And whatever vendor you get, yes, right? If you back up your data, great, you are much better off than your competitor that doesn't. So if I look and I go to restore, now comes the use case of the admins, the ones that are supporting the end users, the ones that have to go recover for different scenarios. Can I go back to a prior point in time? This is a huge and a very important thing to talk about, right? As wonderful and as great as 365 as a platform is, it's published. There is no prior point in time recovery. So when we think about protecting, and even if we were just to frame our mindset around ransomware, right, or some virus, some malware, right, affected us as of this day, I need to be able to say, I need to go back to last Thursday. That's what I need to do last Thursday. And even for, if I'm backing up my data 5 times a day for this particular group, I want to go back last Thursday in the evening. That's how detailed that you need to get. That's how comfortable that you need to be, that you're like, this is the data that needs to come back. And if I'm recovering, I need to be able to recover for different use cases as an admin. I need to recover a message. I need to recover just the inbox, folders in there, my online archive. I need to be able to get to and extract and download this entire mailbox for a legal case. Every single thing, all at once, one snapshot, right? I now need to recover for different scenarios. I need to recover for the user, back to the user, and give them a copy. I don't want to go through and find all of the stuff that you're asking me for that you accidentally deleted, whatever it is that you've lost, right? Or our retention kicked in. Our retention is now 90 days in email, which is very scary. But something happened on this project last summer. All of the email communication happened last summer. That happened to me. I left the company. I saved everything. I had I kept everything in this one mailbox. I saved everything, and it was there. I organized it, and they came back and said, "Hey, this company that you work for, that you did this migration for, they said that they didn't approve you doing this, and that you didn't tell them anything about it. Now we're in a lawsuit." Last summer, I'd already moved on. And I said, "Yeah, no, I have that. You can go look in my mailbox, go get the messages out of my mailbox, go to the backup." So they went to the backup last summer, because that's when the project happened, and it takes that long for lawsuits to occur. And they were able to find the mail, the messages, where I completely said, "Hey, I don't recommend this. I'm telling you that you can do it, but I'm not saying I don't think you should. These are the things that could happen." And sure enough, it happened. And they accepted that in that thread. They accepted that responsibility. It's fine. Let's just do it. And like, I don't feel comfortable with this, but if you want me to do it, this is what we're going to do. I really don't feel comfortable with it. So, right, that's how that is why we need backup. Is it to replace your entire tenant? No, right? Not necessarily. But is it to help you recover from where your production retention has dropped off? Now there's no data for last summer, and I need to go get that data because I'm in a lawsuit and that person's no longer here, right? So being able to write the use cases that are needed back in place, restore as a copy, takes the entire mailbox. So these are, like, I'm showing you these things framed around Druva, but these are the things that you have to think about regardless of vendor, right? That you come in there, can I take this whole mailbox, put it back in the users and give them a copy? Yes. Right here, I don't have time to be and going as an admin. I've got like 100 tickets. I'm going to give you your data back. You go find what you need, delete everything else. Right? That's the action, right? Whatever the support case is. I mean, we have a self-service portal. By profile, you can turn that on to say, everyone in IT that's in the IT profile can go use the self-service restore. So they can go self-service on Exchange or OneDrive or their endpoints. But for some, right, they don't enable the self-service. So I need to be able to recover, like get this data back. Going back absolutely to another user. Microsoft even has that today, so that's good. Now, the granularity aspect, that I talked about, this is what we're looking for. Being able to search across things, and this search is applying to the metadata, to your files, to your email, to anything, from people to people, and they can either work in silo, anything, as an attachment, or they work in conjunction, right, together, right, in terms of that. Now, I've got just one more section that we'll talk about is this collective. Now, we are using teams more. Everyone has been using groups since the beginning of their 365 journey. They just didn't know what it was called. Users didn't know that they were in groups, but then those groups, right, matured and they bolted on this awesome feature called teams. So now a team at its minimum is comprised of a team and the metadata, the group that houses the members, and the SharePoint underlying it. Now, there are other things that get kind of pre-provisioned, but they're accessible as part of that team, right? As part of a group function, like other apps. But those are the core things that house information, right? House data. So when we go to recover a team, we cannot think and say, when I'm recovering at a team level, I need to recover absolutely my HR employee files team. And what else can I do with that? Right? The chat, all the channels, the files associated, or not just the Microsoft Teams related things, but the whole thing, the thing as a whole, right? The whole collective. So what happened in the beginning of Teams and what I've seen happen is that teams sometimes were created too broadly, right? Too big. This department, that department. And then they started using it more, and a bunch of teams, and then actual teams would be channels in here. So then what happened was that they started saying, no, we're going to break it out. But I have all this stuff, all this data in this other team. I want to make a new team with just this. Right. So those are the types of use cases that, like, that's what happens. That's like real world stuff. I don't want to lose this. I don't want to have different members. I want to be able to have a subset of this become a new team. So when I do this and I'm recovering this, I can absolutely recover back, right? Use case, back to the same team, restore it to a new team, or I can actually restore to a team that I go and create on the fly, right? To an existing team. I can go restore just a channel, and or even just the settings of a team. But when I restore that, it is absolutely considering the three things as a whole, right? It's if I'm going to take a team and I'm going to save that, restore it to a new team, it provisions the group, it enables the teams, it restores the chat, right, or the channels and all the metadata that's associated with that team, and then yes, everything that's in that SharePoint. Right. And then you can go down to the granularity level. I have a file, regardless of if it's in a site collection that's associated to a team, right, or not. Let me go, I'll just go to my one that I use. But I need that flexibility. I need to be able to go back and restore data, either the entire site collection, a file, a folder, a list, right? This is this one right here. I had, this is the answer to that one ticket. Hey, I had access to this yesterday, but I don't today. Or I had access to this last week, and no one knows why this person was removed. No one's right. So no, the IT help desk needs to just recover that. They either are going to go add them or they're going to go verify, did you actually have access? Now, in the world of 365, you have back-end audits that can, right, the audit log that can tell you what's happened, but it's hard to piece that together. And there's no way of going into a site collection today or a team today or a group today in 365 and say, who had access to this last week? Who had access to this yesterday? It's just now, right? This is now. When I go to my 365, I see now. So if I'm trying to deal with whether it's a compliance or help desk and say, yeah, I can actually download this JSON file and verify that you were in there last week, or I can download this and give this to our legal team to say, to answer that question, who had access to all of this data? Right? The use cases we can solve as an organization with the backup of our 365 data are numerous. They go beyond just that of ransomware, right? And there are multiple teams. Yes, there is a backup team. In the bigger the organization, the more that you have, the backup team is a team. But there are a number of organizations or departments, even within IT, that need access to this backup, right? Whether if I'm dealing with an end user that did something and modified the wrong data, deleted that column, an admin that is, that didn't mean to apply that policy that affected data. They just did not mean to do that. It's unintentional. Absolutely on malware, we have to think, can the platform that is protecting our data, what use cases can they help us support, right? How are we going to get our data back? And at what granularity and at what cost, and where's this data being stored, and how quickly can I do this? That is the question of how resilient can we be if our data in 365 truly only has one point in time. If our groups, our teams, even our SharePoint, regardless of however many versions that I have in SharePoint, there is this malware that is now going out to a SharePoint library, modifying the number of versions in the library, and then modifying the files, right? Corrupting, encrypting the versions that are left. I mean, they're getting smarter. These guys get smarter and smarter. As Microsoft invests in protecting in that umbrella, in the layers of that umbrella, regardless of if a company uses these features or not, right? You can protect only so much. You can build this umbrella so much, but you will find that there are these things that come up and you're like, seriously, yeah, I guess it was about time they have access to it, right? They compromise the credentials so they can go and iterate some PowerShell or whatever they're doing, and modify the versions across all of those. Yep, absolutely. Okay, great. Sounds good. We have to protect our data, and you have to be able to recover, right? To be resilient, you have to have an option. You have to have it yesterday as an option, last week as an option, 6 months ago as an option especially for your legal team. Let's go back to here, and I think we can take some questions now. As we are wrapping up here.
Yeah, there is one question from your initial slides. Somebody's asking on, Mohan is asking on ransomware for MS Office, the Microsoft Office 365. There was an article which you shared.
Oh yeah, sure,
Can
sure.
you share the link for that? Yeah.
Yeah, let me actually go. I don't know. Let's see. Here. 365. How's that? I'll find it. Oh, I think this might be it. Recover from a ransomware attack. Yeah, there we go. The whole world of the ransomware, like the let me go get this. I'll put it in our chat.
Okay, thank you.
There's a number of them that bleed off of here, right? Absolutely. And don't get me wrong. I believe that in all of the investment that Microsoft is making for all of the security features, right? The preventative, the active measures that they're taking, they're important. The problem comes when, one, companies don't use them. And two, when you use them, you ignore them. And I've seen this where people even create alerts, but they get tired. They don't know how to tailor these alerts. They get tired of these alerts. So you know what they do in their exchange? They go and create a rule that says, take these alerts that come in from this email and dump it in this folder, and I'll get to it later. Right? Meanwhile, even a day later, 5-10 minutes later, it's too late. So I believe in the platform, and I think that what they're doing to try and do everything right. But this is where I get to focus. I want to help close this gap. This is why I have this conversation, why I went to work for a data protection company. There's still gaps, and we can help kind of secure this whole thing to keep your data intact so you keep using this platform. Right? So any other questions? Any other questions?
There are
Come
no other
on, there's a
questions. Yeah.
couple of you. There's not one question about data protection or something. I'm going to call somebody out. Let's see. Who do we have on here? Is anyone listening? Jerry Thomas. Jerry Thomas, we have 1 more minute. I'm going to put you on the spot. What are your thoughts about this topic? No, it's okay. It's all right. Jerry Thomas is shy. Okay. Absolutely. I hope you enjoyed the topic, the conversation. I hope it resonated. And whatever we do, challenge, if you are not part of the data protection group, within your organization, you should ask them as a user, as a creator of data, as a creator of content, how are you protecting my data? My data as an individual, right, in this company. How are you protecting my team's data? If you are part of a data protection group, you need to find the vendor that fits the needs of how your organization secures, right? Considers security. Absolutely. The features and functionality. I, by chance, like I said, showed you and talked to you about the things I looked for: granularity, frequency, right? Flexibility and cost. So absolutely, you guys, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions. And yeah, have a great time. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak. And remember to say thank you to the organizers and the sponsors as you're exiting, and follow the, do the surveys and any and all of that. So I
Thank you,
appreciate the
Vanessa.
time.